What does Paul teach about marriage, about divorce, about remarriage? I want us to just see his discussion on marriage in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Paul, of course, himself was not married, but he is not quiet about the issues of marriage because he spoke as God gave him ability. And when we read Paul's words, we must know we are reading God's words. Therefore, it is what God wants us to know and practice. So we, as married people, must ask ourselves, what has God taught us through Paul? Not what has Paul taught us, but what has God taught us through Paul? And he discusses marriage in many of his letters. But I just want to pick the section in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Verse 10 says, "To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband." In other words, the teachings of Paul are in line with the teachings of Jesus and are in line with the teachings in Malachi, because it's the same God talking through all three sources. And it's clear, a wife must not separate from her husband. Divorce is a no-go zone. And then he says, it's not I talking. To the married I give this command, not I, but the Lord. So that those who are looking for Paul to dilute the message of Malachi that God hates divorce, and the message of Jesus that it was not like that from the beginning. In other words, God did not intend for divorce from the beginning. Paul just confirms it because the source, like I've just said, is the same. To the married, those of you who are married, please understand, it's not Paul talking, it's the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband. You are not allowed to leave him. And we are not given any reasons. It's simply a no-go zone. Whether it is that he is unfaithful, or he is, like in Jesus, in the gospel, there was a question of in case of infidelity. But here it is as a categorical issue. A wife must not separate from the husband. Whether it's lack of providing, the guy is not providing, whether it is whatever. I think the only thing we would ask is, what about if he wants to kill you? And of course, that, since the Bible elsewhere is against murder, it wouldn't contradict itself by asking you to stay in a place where violence is being meted on you and they could easily kill you. But I think the message needs to come out very clear. Before he can go into any detail, he sets the stage clear. To those of us who are married, I give this command. Do you understand the choice of words? It's not a piece of advice. It's a clear command. It's not something you try to do. It's something you must do. You must stay in your marriage. Paul is saying it is a command. That means you must do it. It's not a question of if I feel like. It's a command. Then he says, in case you think I'm just the one commanding, it's not me. It's a command from the Lord. What's the command? That don't divorce. Don't separate from your husband. And I think that's a very, very, very important thing we need to understand. However, verse 11 accepts that situations don't always go in an ideal way. So verse 11 says, but if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband must not divorce his wife. First of all, let me quickly say, verse 10 implied like it was a wife being told. Now, so verse 11 confirms the verse 10 command is not just a command to women. It's a command to men also. And a husband must not divorce his wife. I know some of these scriptures are tough in the sense that divorce has become so common both in Africa but more in the West. It is divorce for any reason. I don't like him. He's no longer interesting. He lost his sparkle, whatever people give. And there's still, some of them are pastors, some are still worship leaders. But look at the word of God being so clear. A wife must not separate from her husband, and a husband must not divorce the wife. So the two words here, the word separate and the word divorce, are used. And the message is whoever you are, you need to understand that it's God's command is to stay in our marriage. Again, let me emphasize, this talk is very important for unmarried people, because the important thing is, if you don't want to end up in this kind of looking prison where you have to stay, upende usipende, whether you like it or not, then the best thing is don't get married. Simply don't go there. Number one. Number two, take your time. Don't let somebody take you on an emotional roller coaster and you marry within months. No. Take your time. Don't take months, take years. Where you are praying and seeking the mind of God. Is he the one? Is she the one? Because if it's going to be a no-go zone, you can't divorce, you can't separate, you can't. Then young people have to be very clear. That's not something you want to rush to. So, think before you enter. Number two, take your time. Don't run into marriage. Get to know the person. Obviously, it needs to be said clearly. As you get to know the person, you must not behave like you are married. Sex is only within married. Even if you have a long engagement, if you have sex, you will be sinning. You will be a candidate for hell. You have lost the Lord's favor. So we are talking about a period of engagement that does not include any involvement in sex. It's just getting to understand who the other person is, and that will be important. But thirdly and importantly, it may be good to ask friends who know both of you to make their comments and to seek God on your behalf and tell you what they hear God saying. Finally, it will be your decision. You have to hear God for yourself as a girl and for yourself as a man. But I think those three things will be important. Think, am I really called to this thing? It's tough. Take your time. And I think that will important. Thirdly, involve others who love you and are concerned about you and who know both of you. That's really an important thing we need to say. So, right at the beginning, Paul is teaching a wife must not separate her husband. A husband must not divorce his wife, whichever language you use. So he has not left us with any doubts about that one. And the other thing I note is that when people go apart, you can't blame one and not the other, because here there's no way Paul would be directing himself to the wife if it is not that they are wives who are the ones who are the cause of divorce. And they don't cause it just by running away from their homes. Sometimes it's making the life of the husband hell on earth. So he is really looking for being thrown out. He even says, if you're a man, beat me. Because what he wants is to be able to say, hey, I am not the one who left him, he beat me up. But you are the one who actually forced it, you caused it. You are the cause. Between you and God and your husband, you know the truth. So when Paul is saying, wives, don't separate, it means he knows it's possible for women to cause it. And sometimes it's the men claiming, no, it's my wife was just difficult. No, for husbands to be told not to divorce, it means it's possible that some divorces are caused by men. They are being told, be careful. But let's look at verse 11 again. But if she's separate, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. In other words, the best case is for you not to get divorced or separated. But if you got separate, it will be important that you understand then that you are going to remain single. A lot of people divorce in order to remarry. Here you say no. If you actually separate, if you divorce, which you have been told not to, it will be okay if you don't remarry. The trouble is to separate and then remarry. Why do I think Paul wants the person to remain and not to remarry? Maybe I can suggest 3 things. Number 1, although you have separated, the truth is you are still believing in God, who is able to turn your violent husband or your violent wife and tame her. And she may want to come back in the relationship. Question mark. If you have already remarried, how will you sort out that when she says, I'm sorry, what I did was wrong, I should not have left you, I want us to come back together. What will you do? So Paul is saying, stay ready. If you are not the one who has caused it, and it has happened, it's okay. You are still going to heaven as long as you are not the one instigating it. And number 2, you are not the one who is remarrying. You are available into the future, long into the future. And I think that's the first reason why he is saying. Number 2, because if you was to allow this provision that you can remarry, it encourages many marriages. You know there are many unhappy marriages, but they last. They endure. They don't enjoy. They endure to the end. For the benefit of the children, for the benefit of many things. But if truth be told, it's not a very happy marriage. What about if you knew you can job dump this girl and get another one? Better, younger, better looking. That will encourage you to divorce, to separate, because already you have an eye on another single girl somewhere who is going to replace your wife. Already you have the example of a younger man who is interested in you, not this guy who doesn't appreciate what he got when God brought you his way. Now, so if you are told you can remarry, what will happen is that it will encourage you to divorce. Thirdly and importantly, I think it's important to understand Paul wants you to work on your marriage. Do your very best in that marriage. Work on your spouse. Love them, care for them, and do your best to ensure they stay in the marriage. You are not going to do that if there is a possibility you can invest elsewhere. You normally invest in something when you know you have committed yourself long term. And he wants you to understand that in marriage, you should be entering into it for life without any indication of a possibility. So he's saying, no. If you actually go separate ways, you both must remain single. You either remain single or be reconciled to the husband. In other words, you have an alternative. Both of them are spiritually okay. Either remain separated from your wife, but not getting involved in remarriage or in sex. Or go back to your wife and reconcile. Those are the only 2 alternatives available. And I think that will be a very, very important thing to understand, even as you deal with the issues of divorce. Verse 11, therefore, is saying that it is possible to separate, but do not remarry. Obviously, I have to agree. The last 20 years, when I have been involved in some marital counseling, there are times when the best thing is for them to live separately. You have a violent husband, or sometimes you have an immoral one, and with these days of HIV/AIDS, instead of both of you dying and then the children are left without anybody to look after them, the best thing may be to live separate until the spouse is able to withdraw from that immorality so that he doesn't bring the disease to you. In fact, I even recommend, if he comes back, both of you must go for HIV tests. Even if he is repented, even if he has come back to the Lord, it will still be important to protect yourself. So, what I'm really trying to say is that there are times when separation is the better thing for the sake of the children, or even for your own survival. But it's like Paul is saying, it's separation with the possibility of reconciliation at a later time. You can't force it, but God is able to accomplish it. And I think that will be an important thing. Just look at verse 12, where he is saying, to the rest I say this, I, not the Lord. If any brother has a wife who is not a believer, she is willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. Here, we are learning clearly that backsliding will not be excuse for separation or divorce. If your husband backslides, you still stay with him. It's only him he can leave you because he's not happy with a woman who doesn't go into the beer halls with him and parties. Maybe he might dump you. But you as a Christian woman will still be available, despite the fact that your husband has backslidden. You will not be the one to throw him out. And the same thing with you as a man. If your wife has backslidden, it's no longer walking with the Lord, Paul is saying, stay with her. Continue to stay with her. You are not the one to cause the divorce. The fact that they are backslidden, you know very well, they will go to hell for that's a choice they have made. But for marriage is another thing. It will not go to heaven. So he says, stay in your marriage with a non-Christian. He is the same one who, in Corinthians chapter 6, he is saying, don't be unequally yoked. In other words, if you are not yet married, don't marry a non-Christian. But if you are married and your husband backslides, then he is saying, stay in that marriage. Alternatively, if both of you are non-Christians, then one of you gets saved, and the other one refuses to get saved, stay in that marriage. That's what Paul wants to emphasize and to make absolutely clear. Look at verse 13. And if a woman has a husband who is not believer and is willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about a husband or a wife. Whoever ends up with a spouse who is a non-Christian, and I have explained there are only two possibilities. Either one of the spouses has backslidden, or alternatively, both of you are non-Christians, and now you are married and you are non-Christian, then one gets saved, the other one doesn't get saved. And you are being told whether it's a woman's case, verse 12, or it's a the man's case, verse 12, woman's case, verse 13, both of them. You are not allowed to divorce with an excuse that these people have backslidden or they are not saved. And I think that's important. So, the Christian spouse in this party of Christian and Christian cannot leave the marriage. Of course, non-Christian is not at the controls of these Pauline rules. God does not. He has already rejected God, so he doesn't live to honor that. So a non-Christian can live. And I think that's important. But look, just note verse 14. How come you can stay in that marriage when one of you is not born again? Verse 14 gives the answer. For the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through the wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through the believing husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but it is they are holy. In other words, as long as one of you is subject to the Lord, there will be blessings coming to that marriage through the saved party. So you can stay there, be assured of God's blessings. So, although your spouse is not a Christian, God is able to handle it. That's what verse 14 is saying. That your children will still be Christian children. Your children will still receive the blessing of the Lord, despite one of the spouses not being a Christian. So Paul encourages that if one of you backslides, let marriage still continue. And we have to salute many women who have non-Christian husbands, either because they backslid or because the two had married when they were non-Christian. Then the woman got saved. Many cases it's women. And they stay in that marriage. I've had one testimony after another. After 20 years of staying with a non-Christian husband, the husband says, wait a minute, this thing is for real. And on the basis of the testimony of a wife who is closely watched by the husband, he finally says, yeah, Christianity is real, and finally gives his life to the Lord. Many, many cases of testimonies. And that's why he is saying, stick with it. Stick with him. Of course, your marriage will not be an ideal marriage. An ideal marriage requires both the husband and the wife be born again, so that both of them are not pulling to different directions. As long as one of you is not saved, you'll still be pulling different directions. However, there is a possibility that you are there as a missionary. And because of your consistent living and talking the Christian message, your spouse will finally get to know the Lord. So you are being told, stick there. Do not leave. Look at verse 15. Verse 15 says, but if the unbeliever believes, let it be so. The brother or sister is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace. You can't force yourself on a man. So if he is a backslider and doesn't want to stay with you, do not force yourself to the non-Christian, so that there will be peace, not violence. So let him go. But because you are still praying, one day he may actually come back to the Lord. And that will be important. Verse 16 is saying, how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? You've gone different ways. But how do you know? Maybe it is you that you finally come back to as he thinks about your testimony. She thinks about your testimony. Verse 16 is saying, there is a possibility that they could later come back and know the Lord. And I think that will be very important. 17 to 20 says, nevertheless, each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned to them. But as God has called them, just as God has called them. This is the rule I lay down in all the churches. Was a man already circumcised when he was called? He should not become uncircumcised. Was a man uncircumcised when he was called? He should not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing. Keep God's commands. Keeping God's command is what counts. Each person should remain in the situation they were in when God called them. What are we learning? If you're already married to a non-Christian, stick. Where salvation found you, God will bless you there. You can't start saying, but I married this guy who I didn't know. I never thought I was playing games. No. Whatever position, did salvation find you a slave? Did salvation find you uncircumcised? God will bless you the way you are. Because these are externalities that cannot affect the ability of God to bless you and to continually guide you. That's what he is saying in verse 20. Each person should remain in the situation they were in when God called them. Getting saved does not excuse you out of your old covenants. Whatever commitments you had done earlier, you still have to keep your commitments. You can't just dump them. Maybe you're in a business that was not right. Now you must ensure you if you are pulling out, you must follow the clauses of the contract. So whichever place God finds you, He wants you to continue and be somebody reliable. I think that's what I hear verse 20 really saying. And it will be important that we understand that. But let's keep over and look at verse 39, still talking about marriage. Verse 39 is saying, a woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives. But if her husband dies, she is free to marry anyone she wishes, but he must belong to the Lord. In my judgment, he is happier if she stays as she is, and I think that I too have the Spirit of the Lord, of God. As he comes to finish this issue of separation and divorce, he starts saying, it's okay to remain single. That's what verse 40 is saying. It's okay to remain single. And you can actually be blessed single. You don't have to get married. However, if you're already married, he uses very strong words here. If you are bound to a husband, if you are bound to your wife, then it's important that you know that binding is until death do us part. You are bound to your husband as long as he lives. If he dies, you are free. How free? You are free to marry anyone you wish. But verse 39 is saying, but he must belong to the Lord. But before then, you are bound. And I think that's what everybody needs to understand. So he is completing the discussion on divorce and separation by saying, let it be understood, Christian marriage is a monogamous, long life relationship. I repeat, Christian marriage is a monogamous, lifelong relationship. There is no escape route. It's like a dual carriageway. And or a superhighway, until the exit point, even if you know you are going the wrong direction, keep going until the exit point. And the exit point for marriage is one of you dying. And if you harass the person or kill them, obviously you are a murderer. So it's important to understand you must stay that marriage. Or if you separate, stay single without remarrying. That's what Paul is actually advising. So what have you seen? We have seen that Paul looks at every type of situation that could cause you divorce. And in all of it, he says, no, do not divorce. Do not separate. But then we have also seen Paul accepts that sometimes there may be forces that force you to live separately. He says if it happens, that's okay. But remain single. Do not remarry. That's what really Paul is actually saying in this portion of Scripture. So what does that tell us then? That you must learn to grow your own trees. What does that mean? Since you cannot make timber from other people's trees, plant your own, grow them, and look after those trees well. What am I really saying? You have a spouse. She may be difficult. She may be a lion. But if human beings can tame lions, you can tame your lion at home. Find a way of taming your lion, because you are going to be with her until as long as she is alive, or as long as you are alive. So that's what really Paul is teaching us. So, I repeat, those of you who are not married, don't marry in a hurry. And if you decide you are called to marriage, whoever you meet, have a long, reasonably long engagement so that you get to know each other well, to make a commitment. Finally, if you actually do enter into marriage, please understand it is for life. I repeat verse 39. A woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives. And I want to add, as long as she lives, because death is the only one that can bring down a marriage. Thank you.